All right, we're live. So End Hype Live. It is Thursday again. It's 5 p.m. For all you people that are watching in the replay, you should join us live. You can watch on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, ask questions, and then we'll have experts like Dan here tell you what they think. So it's not just all about me. But before we get into it, before we dive into the mechanical engineering, product development, startup world. Guys, we're trying to grow this live thing every Thursday. I have a lot of fun from this. I get a lot of value from it. If you get some value, please share it. Share it on your social channels so we can get more people in the chat, more people watching, and I can know what that one question, what that one piece of information that you need that will unlock that next level of success. So like, what's the obstacle that's preventing you from, I don't know, doing the thing that you want to do, right? So if I can't answer it, I'm going to bring somebody on and we're going to have a cool conversation. But that's it from me. Dan, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Can you give me the spark notes, like who you are, what's going on in Dan world? What are you all about?
Sure. Yeah. I'll give you I'll give you a version of it. Well, first of all, thank you for calling me an expert, and I like to preface that by saying, like, first of all, I've worked for like so many failed companies, so I guess I'm kind of an expert on what not to do as much as what to do.
Super valuable.
So yeah, it can be as valuable or more valuable. But yes, I am a product designer, so I have a background in mechanical engineering from Virginia Tech, and I've been working for getting close to 20 years now here in the Northern Virginia, DC, Maryland area, where you are as well, which is kind of how we know each other a little bit, and we've crossed paths a fair few times. It gets to be kind of a small world. So I've worked for all different kinds of companies, as I've mentioned, most of which are no longer around, but they tend to be in the kind of low volume, high tech electromechanical space. So to give you an example, my first job, I was designing a industrial robotic vacuum. So I did that for a few years. And then I moved on to underwater vehicles and other stuff in the aerospace world and medical world and all kinds of stuff. So sounds kind of all over the place, but they're actually more similar than different a lot of the times. So yeah, I'm a SolidWorks power user. I don't know. I'm a designer at heart. I love doing it. I've designed, I have patents to my name and all kinds of tips and tricks that I like to share with people, and looking to get a little bit more as I grow into the business side of things, which is why I really appreciate all the stuff that you're doing.
Oh yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, like so people that I connect with, they want to. A lot of them, they want to be you, right? They're like, hey, I'm working at this corporate job. I want to jump in. I want to jump in with a small company, maybe get a higher level of responsibility. That's, in my opinion, that's like the fun reason to work for a small business or a startup, is they let you do stuff that you have no reason doing, and you can learn a little faster. But a lot of people, they want to be Dan, right? And that might be on the pathway for them to start their own company or do their own thing. But can you give us, like, why do you put yourself into this situation? You said you've worked for a few failed companies. So like, what takes you back to the well, other than, obviously we got to do something, right? We got to get paid.
Yeah.
Pay the bills. But like, what takes you back to that same place, and what do you like about it, or what do you hate about it?
Yeah, no, that's a great point, as I do keep going back to very small companies, and I've strayed from that once, and I've learned that I do love the small companies, right? Because it's exactly what you said. You get to wear so many hats, you get to do so many different things. That first company where I was designing an industrial robotic vacuum, I didn't know anything about vacuums. I didn't know anything about anything. I was like, why are these people having me do this? This is crazy. But that's actually a great way to get started, right? Is you do something that seems beyond your reach, and if you're the kind of person that can step up and do it, you're gonna learn a lot. It's kind of the trial by fire approach to things, or the sink or swim approach.
Nice.
But exactly as you said, I have to remind myself, because like anything else, it could be a grind from day to day. But I have to remind myself, the Dan of 20 years ago or 30 years ago, this is exactly what you wanted to do. So the days that it kind of stinks, or you're doing the paperwork or whatever, you're like, look, you're in the seat that you wanted to be in, and other people wanted to be here. So it does help me reframe a little bit. But
I like
as
that.
far as why do I keep coming back to these small companies? That's a good question. And there's definitely been people in my life that are like, why are you doing this? You could definitely have a more cushy job, because a lot of these companies have not been, as I said, they've not been stable, right? I felt for a while like I was on kind of a 3-year churn cycle, and more like a contractor than an employee. But I just love it. I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, it moves fast. There's not a lot of bureaucracy. You can shape not only the product. I mean, you get to see. I mean, I get to see everything from concept to source selection, like the whole gamut of things, right? So I have a ton of control over the finished product, which is very exciting. You learn a bunch of stuff. So in a way, I guess that makes me a generalist. But as I've done this more and more, I have developed a lot of specializations down a lot of those different paths. So it's fun. It's exciting. It gets me out of bed. I don't know what any given day is going to look like, right? You just kind of got to go into it full bore and deal with things as they come. And
so a lot of people that I'll talk with, kind of because where I was positioning my branding, and we're sticking with people, but I'm changing I'm always like tweaking my messaging a little bit. But a lot of the people that I talk to, they're engineers, right? Or there's some flavor of technical person, and most people work at medium or large size companies, at least in this area, right? We kind of live in the land of the defense contractor. So they're literally like a cog in a cog in a cog of a machine, right? And they kind of look out the window and think, man, it would be cool to be in a startup. So like in non-fantasy terms, right? I work with a lot of like high growth kind of semi-tech companies, and I see like they're just smashing through things. They hit obstacles and they have to overcome them. But it's like people have more agency, I guess. And it seems like that's what you're touching on, is like people in the team kind of care more than in a big company, and everybody has a hand and can say like, oh, I designed that subsystem or that widget, and I learned a little bit more about it. So they have like more ownership of the idea. Does that make sense?
yeah, absolutely.
Like we were batting around that word, and some people they don't believe this is a thing, but like intrapreneur, that's you were saying that you really like that word intrapreneur.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything you're saying, right? Like, I very much, it's so many engineers talk about like literally an idea that I will have in a shower, I could see executed in 2 weeks, right? Like it's super, it could be a super fast cycle. We use a lot of quick turn. There's not a lot of red tape. A lot of the times we use a lot of quick turn manufacturing. So, we can prototype without drawings, and I've shaped the culture in a lot of ways. So, introducing more additive manufacturing, where we're buying more of these machines in house, kind of demonstrating, look, we can increase cycle times from, weeks to days, right? Like I went in and they were making stuff out of cardboard, the first prototypes. And I was like, no, like, like let's print it. It'll look exactly the way it's going to look. And, so yeah, there's that aspect of it, where you're coming in and you're teaching people what can be done, how it can be done better, what tools are out there to, because a lot about being the designer is also you're kind of a focal point of communication, right? So a lot of times I will do the initial concept design, right, in SolidWorks, and make it pretty, right, because that could be used to sell stuff, or that could be used to kind of like get products or projects to the next level. So
Yep.
they're increasingly So you're demonstrating, look, here's these tools that I have that can add value in the design process, but they can also add value in other avenues of growth for the company, right? We could show things off quicker. We can be more responsive to customer needs, right? So, the designer is kind of an integrator in my mind, right? So you touch a lot of points of the company.
Yeah, yeah.
And as you've mentioned before, designers tend to be kind of critical thinkers. So a lot of times I'll take that kind of critical thinking process and try and do it tactfully to go to other departments and say, hey, let me help you out. Let me show you a way that we can be more responsive or reduce costs using some of these tools that I have access to.
Yeah, that makes sense. For like a takeaway that people watch this that I want them to think about is like if you're an engineer and you're thinking about creating a startup, I advise people to like maybe go out and be an intern or get a job at a startup first. And not just because you'll get some work experience, but because you're taking like a business school lesson from the inside. You're getting paid to learn really, really fast, but you'll say like, oh, this is what an effective sales team looks like, maybe, but this is what a sales team needs. So if I form my own startup and I have a CEO who's the sales guy, like these are the kind of deliverables, like you just said, like a nice rendering, right? That's what they're going to need to go sell the idea to somebody else. They might need a slick sheet with a nice rendering. So it's going to inform you about how a company actually functions. So like, but yeah, the designer more than any other role in the company ends up being the entrepreneur, because you're like the cog in the beginning of a company. It's so much of its product development. Later, product development is a much smaller percentage of the company. Like in a mature company, product development might be 10% or 20% of the total effort of a company, and that's like a very product focused company. But like a small one, it might be 80%, 90% of the company is like revolved around the sales guy comes out and gets the feedback that you have to turn into requirements, and then marketing needs the rendering, so you have to like decide what it's going to look like. Everybody has to come through you as a conduit because you're trying to invent something that's new. So for anybody that's watching and it's like, how do I like form a team, or how do I function in a team, or how do I learn the hard way to deal with people, or any of those things that are like that pesky business part, like transforming from an engineer into a business person, like work in a smaller company. You kind of are forced to engage a little bit better.
Totally agree. I've had to do so much crazy stuff, right? From like going to trade shows, right?
Yeah,
where like I'm setting up the trade show and I'm answering, I mean, there's the expression like we're all in sales, right? And it's and it becomes true, right? It's important, right? At some level, right? Whether you're at a job interview or even once you get into the company, you're going to these design meetings, you want to sell your idea, right? You want to convince other people like, look, you want to move on to the next phase of the design. So you have to convince, all these different parties, right, that this is a path to go to. And you absolutely do that at a small company. You have to just, you wear so many hats. And I was like anybody else, you start as kind of a, maybe a shy engineer, and you kind of got to deal with stuff and do it, and you get better over time.
Yeah. Now I think that like that perspective, it really struck me working with people over the past couple of years, is like if I could give somebody one kind of unlock or one hack, it's like if you're used to the comfort of a corporate environment, there's a reason why it's stable and boring, because if you want to do something else, like it's a cultural mismatch between what you want and what they provide. But if you're thinking about it, like you don't have to just quit your job and start a company tomorrow. Like you could just go work for a smaller company and you kind of get a taste. I'm really into this idea, Dan. I can keep touching on this. Is like people create these like fantasy future realities, right? They're like, I'll be happy, or like I'll be successful when this happens. I think the other day I used that car analogy. Like people, they want this like fancy car. And I'm like, well, you could just go rent that car this weekend and try it. You might not even like it, right? So you're fantasizing about something that you could bring into the future. But more importantly, it's like you're kidnapping your life. You're putting your life on hold the entire time. And people want to become an entrepreneur, or they want to change the world or change their life. And I'm like, just go work with Dan, right? Go work with it, go work for a small company, and like you'll probably see if you like it or not. And if you don't like it, just go back to work for Boeing. Boeing makes cool stuff too. Like you'll just make a very small piece of that cool thing. But like if you want to start your own company, just go see what that looks like. Try it out, right?
We're getting esoteric here.
Yeah.
I like it, but yeah, the way I think about it, right, is like, is the journey, is the destination, right? That's the quote.
Yeah.
So I do a lot of triathlon and stuff like that, and there's been so many times where like you train for this big race, and then the big race is over, and then it's like, now what? But if you enjoy the process, right? If you enjoy getting out and riding your bike and running, right? That's
yeah.
Then the race is kind of secondary to all that. So
yeah.
I think we may want to take a minute and cover. I don't want to paint startups as too great because there's plenty of downsides to.
Oh yeah,
to them.
yeah. Let's talk about.
So I want to be real about it.
Problems, obstacles, all those other pieces. Because I mean, yeah. I mean, you already said like a couple of these companies, they don't exist anymore. So there must be some downside. This isn't just a magical unicorn land, right?
No, it's the Wild West, right? Which is why you can do whatever you want because there's no rules. But then there's the downside of that, right? It's like, there's so many. You've talked about this, but like I crave requirements, and you just so frequently like don't get requirements, right? So you're kind of going blind a lot of times, or kind of a part of your job becomes sussing requirements out of other people and stuff like that. Oh gosh, it's a lot of craziness a lot of the time. So
what are some top obstacles that you see those companies face? Like maybe not even in just the engineering and design sphere, but just in general, like kind of doing a post-mortem and being like, they had this problem moving forward because of this and this reason.
Sure. Yeah. So it seems like you can go fast, right? So it's this efficiency paradox, right? Where like, you can go fast because there aren't a lot of obstacles, but a lot of times things are extremely inefficient. And what I mean by that is like, I'll go to these companies and there's no configuration management system, right? So you don't know what rev you're going off. You don't know where the files are. So you spend more time than you'd like to kind of like chasing your tail around, right? Like realizing you're not using the correct revision. The process exists for a reason sometimes. And so when you don't have that process, it can cause a lot of issues. Or you're getting stuff handed off to you and you don't know the design history, so you got to kind of become a little bit of a mind reader, right? Like I'm looking at someone else's files, right? Like, all right, maybe they did this because of this, but maybe not. And so it's tricky, right? So you have to you're moving fast, but a lot of times you can end up going back a lot because you're working off of information that you thought was correct that isn't correct.
Yeah.
Or again, without requirements, you could get too far down the process and realize, oh, this is not actually what the customer wants, or this is not actually what. So
we see a lot of people get to like the 80% mark, and then that last 20% or so it is like where all the work is. It's like, hey, we're moving fast, we're breaking things, like we're fun, and they get to the 80%, like where there's a almost fully functioning prototype, and then they realize like there's no pathway to scale from that thing. So then that last 20% ends up being like another 100%.
Yeah, absolutely right. Huge. Yeah, it's a huge problem, and it's a lot of managing up too. So people that aren't in the space maybe will see that what you've completed and think it's done, and so they'll you kind of get in these butting of heads. Well, why isn't it done? When is it going to be done? And what they're not seeing is that last phase, which is all the the scalability, the cost reduction. They they intuitively see something and it looks like it works and it looks like it's done, and they're not seeing that last portion, or maybe they haven't even accounted for that last portion,
Yeah.
In whatever they're figuring for timelines or resources. But that last portion is crucial, right? Like that's how you deliver something that is, again, is scalable and is cost effective and all those kind of things. So
yeah, that's where all the money is. So
right, exactly. So there's a lot of managing up. There's a lot of, and I think a lot of that is why these companies have failed, because they didn't account for that. That last percentage, and at the end of the day, kind of it falls on you. Like, well, we don't have any more resources, so
I
make it work.
I see a lot of that where it's like it's a rush to the market, and then it's okay. We made the trade show, and we got to sell this thing, and I tell them like that's like looks like functions like prototype. There's another $200,000 worth of development that has to happen. You can't sell that thing, and they're like, well, we're out of money.
Yeah.
But like, because I'm on the outside of things, so I give people like a roadmap, and I'm like, you're exactly halfway in the roadmap. But yeah, there's a lot of like hold up and wait things or financial issues. You see that. I don't know how much of that you've experienced, but people like they grow the teams really fast, spend the money, and assume that there's going to be like another round or another like thing that will happen by fiat where the company will continue to grow, and then they're just like, we're going to shelf this project.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, totally. So I guess one thing that I've seen, and this is maybe a piece of advice if people are picking a startup, that it's kind of a trap that I fell into, and it's where basically a lot of the companies I've worked for had a cool technology, but it wasn't a product. It was just a cool technology, right? It wasn't necessarily solving some it was a hammer trying to find a nail, right? It was like, yeah, it's cool, right? Like there's this new technology, this new science that we found, and we're trying to find something to do with it. And particularly as an engineer, you like working on cool things, right? So you're like, yes, that seems really cool. Let's do that. But if it's not really solving a need, right? So at the end of the day, if it's only marginally better, right? You're not going to change people's behavior. They're not going to go to you. It seems scary, right? We're not going to go to you if it's marginally better. It has to be way, way better, right? It has to perform better and reduce costs. People don't care, you have a few early adopters that might care about, oh, that's cool or whatever, but like
that's why like is get up off the couch talk, right? Or this is bad, but like for me, I equate customer behavior like with me going to a party or something. Like I naturally don't want to go to the party,
right?
So I gauge any social engagement. Like, is it better than not doing anything? Right? Is it like it would I derive more? Would I derive more happiness from like not doing anything at all? And like that's how people's purchasing behavior is like you think you have something that's really cool, but it has to be so good that somebody's gonna like get up off the couch, like get ready, like prepare something, go buy a bottle of wine, like travel across town. There's all these little barriers, all these reasons to say no, basically. And so
yeah, sure. So right. I mean, I give you all these examples, right? That first product, that industrial robotic vacuum, right? We're pitching this to janitorial services and buildings, right? And they're like, our way is fine. Like, why you're going to buy this robot? I mean, what do you do with it? How do you? I mean, it was just it was this total mismatch, and like, so you really get these. I'm always amazed how much longer I would think personally. Like the technology has been here for 10, 20 years before it's like really, really adopted and in the field, right? Like,
yeah.
Like 3D printing, right? It's like the technology of now from like 20 years ago, but that's just the way it goes, right? It takes a long time for people's perceptions to change, or people say, yeah, maybe the way we're doing it isn't perfect, but like it kind of works, and like we could do your thing, but we have to put out our neck and change all of our processes. And you're small. Who are you anyways? Are you going to be around in a year or two?
Are you going to support this product like later if it breaks? And especially in the B2B world, innovation really is predicting the present instead of predicting the future, because the technology usually already exists. And I was just talking to somebody earlier about this, is like about combing intellectual property libraries, right? Because there's so many ideas. The world has so many ideas. You could literally, like, we could go back to Virginia Tech right now and go to their commercialization office and be like, got any ideas? And they have thousands and thousands of ideas that are just sitting there waiting to be commercialized. It's a research institution. Nobody's doing anything with them, right? They're just sitting there. You could pick one, and that's how 3D printing got started, right? Somebody in a college invented SLS, and then some dude licensed it and commercialized it, and it still took them 10 years before they had a machine that was even worthy of being used, and then another 10 years before people thought it was cool. But it's like, I don't know. I see tech companies, and I hope that the designers bring a level of pragmatism. I don't know. This is like where engineers, like, natural questioning and kind of like naysaying behavior, I think, is helpful for companies. So they're like, why would somebody want that? Why?
Yeah,
But,
to kind of to your point, like there's so many times where I'll be working on something and you don't want to reinvent the wheel, right? So
yeah,
I'll see something, I'm like, someone's got to have done this before, right? Like
yeah,
there's no way this is a problem that I'm the only person that has this problem, right? And so I'll go do a search. And could save, I mean, in the design cycles, it could save a huge amount of time, right? If you can
yeah,
go piggyback, and then 2 out of 10 times, no one has. And I'm like, okay, well, that's cool too, because now I found something that definitely should exist that doesn't exist. But
yep,
you got to think that way a little bit. I mean, or a lot, right? Or you're just going to go down, you're just wasting your time going down avenues that people have already gone down.
yeah. I think it's interesting because working with non-technical people, if they're pitching me, they're like, hey, this should exist. Here's this idea that I have, and I'm literally on the phone, like, you're them, and I'm like, okay, this sounds like a not insane thing, and I look at it in Google, I'm like, there, that exact thing exists. But kind of on the other side of that, I like it when ideas already exist, because then if you already knew with the janitorial services that they were buying a robot, but it was just garbage, right? Or if it could easily be improved, like, you'd know that the market existed, and you could say, like, now we have a context for value, we have a context for design, and all we have to do is present, like, a bigger gap, like a bigger value gap, or we have to replicate that with other janitorial companies or companies that do cleanup, like, in another industry. But in general, it's I don't know, maybe it's like less sexy for startups to do that, so they try to do like wild stuff. But I mean, I'm mostly from the manufacturing world, so it's like the most boring world that is imaginable. It's like something is extremely proven out before manufacturing really wants to mess with it. So
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. Everyone wants to do the sexy stuff, wants to think that they're, blue ocean or paving the way. And there's plenty of room to do that still. Like, there's tons of new stuff or combining different applications of stuff. But yeah, don't reinvent the wheel if it's already been done. Like you're not helping anybody. Particularly, again, as you get more into like, high-tech electromechanical stuff. I mean, that's an aggregate. We're integrating all different kinds of stuff. It's not one thing, right? It's all different kinds of things. So, yeah, we are, a little bit in a new space, but combining other things. So,
that kind of brings us to another, like, good line of questioning, or something that people might get value out of, is, do you have some design approach tips or thoughts on that? Like, how do you approach a problem? So, because I know, people are out there that they have an idea and they're like, now, like, what do I do? What does that process look like? You have some thoughts on that, or tips? I'm sure that
yes,
people would really
absolutely.
love that.
So as you know, I write for Solid Smack if people wanted to check that out.
Solid
Yes.
plug.
But this is where bit by bit I have so many thoughts and have so many frustrations that I've had to have an outlet. And so That's historically where I put stuff. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff isn't new at all, the stuff that I'm going to say, but like, I mean, it's a lot of stuff you're saying, it's just good. It's good practical stuff, right? Like fail fast, right? Like I'm such a strong believer in that, right? Like that's why I love a lot of these 3D printing technologies, because I want to get good stuff to market. I don't want to just kind of like spin my wheels or kick up dust, right? So if something's not going to work, I want to know about it quickly. And not knowing if it works can be from a technical aspect, or not knowing could be, I present it to the various other parties, which could be the operations department or the service department or product management, and they'll tell me, no, that's not going to work because you're not, addressing X need that's really what we're trying to do here. So it's all, yeah. So that concept, I guess the concept of just design thinking, right, which is again kind of a popular thing, but it's this concept of design cycles, right, where you prototype, you test, you iterate, and you repeat, right? That's basically how it goes. Mm-hmm. And you try and get better and better at that. I think a lot of people maybe aren't aware, like, so there's all kinds of prototyping that you could do, right? Like SolidWorks being virtual prototyping. Mm-hmm. So I'm a huge fan of that, right? Like that's a way that you can kind of do stuff super quickly. It's very low cost from an actual material standpoint, obviously, right? Like you're failing in a virtual space. But then I think another thing that people will do is they'll get too caught up in that, so they'll get kind of stuck in that world and not break out into the the world of the real, right? You can get this thing, people call it like cat eye or whatever, where you're looking at this design on the screen and it seems so great, but you're missing the forest for the trees somehow, right? Like sure. the scale's off, or just something is like, you can't get the tool that's the critical tool to assemble it, like in this thing, right? Like you just totally miss something. So yep. So it's this interplay, right? And it's, I kind of think of it as a craftsmanship of sort, right? Of like knowing, everyone's always asking, what's the secret? How do you know? And I'm like, well, you do it a long time and you make a lot of mistakes and you constantly get a little bit better and better. And I know that's not a satisfying answer, but, that's what keeps it exciting and interesting. And, all the other things, staying on top of all the new stuff that's coming out there, right? All the new, additive manufacturing technologies, like the way I do a design now that I would have done it 10 years ago, the exact same design, like this has come up recently, is different because I now have new things that I could do that I couldn't do even 10 years ago. So
yeah, I mean that's for sure. So let's recap that really quickly. Is like we want to get information as quickly as possible. So fail fast. To me, that means like I mean, I love CAD, so we use the same CAD package, and I know exactly what you're talking about because I'll work on something and then we'll make it, and it's like this big, and to me, it's like as big as a car because I've been looking at it forever, right? But it's like you don't get any real information until it exists in reality, and then on the business level, the business doesn't get any information until it touches the customer. So it's like while you're kind of fiddling with the design and not printing it and showing it to people, like nothing's actually happening. It just feels like you're working really hard, but like that you're not like actually going towards any kind of meaningful goal, I guess. So like the fail fast thing, I like that. And then for anybody that's looking at developing their business, it kind of like scales up from there too. It's like while you're fiddling around with your product and your team is like, and you're not getting feedback from your customer, you're not actually like, your whole business model could be like you said, too big or too small or not fit or whatever.
Let me take one step back, which I think as we kind of danced around this, actually, the very first thing, right? So I have this framework I'm trying to kind of teach that I don't know if I created this, but it's understand, synthesize, execute. So I think I kind of skipped over the understand part, right? Which is like a little bit what you and I were talking about, which is like some people get something and they just want to, there's this urge to just to start doing stuff, right? Like that feels like progress. But step one is to understand, right? And that means different things at different contexts, but it could be what we were just talking about, like does this already exist, right? Or can I piggyback off of other things? Like basically kind of gathering your information and making
What
sure
should
you're
this
working
thing be? What
right.
should it be?
Right. So that might be requirements. If you can't get
Yeah.
requirements, do the best you can. That can be, for me, a lot of, again, as an integrator, right? So we know we're going to use certain components. We know we're going to use certain off-the-shelf stuff, certain motors or computers or whatever. So I'm going to go gather those models. I'm going to go read those data sheets to make sure that I understand kind of the building blocks. Because if you start working off of incorrect information, right, you're building on a faulty foundation, right? Like
Right. You're
you're
scaling problems, right?
you're scaling problems, right?
Yeah.
Or like, as
Yeah.
I tell like people, like you're making if you make a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy, right? Like, you got to make sure that what you're starting with is clean and good. So that's kind of the understand process, and that just takes discipline, right? Like, I get it. You want to show, like, you're just anxious. You gotta, but you gotta have the discipline to like sit down. Don't you don't have to write like a dissertation, but sit down, just take a little bit of time, right? What are we doing? Why are we doing it? How are we going to do it, right? Like,
Yep.
however that process makes sense, to whatever it is that you're trying to do as a one person in the garage or whatever,
Like we do like full blown products requirement documents with people, and there'll be huge gaps, but the one that is almost always a gap, and it's the most valuable piece of information, is just like, sketch me a diagram of the pieces of your idea, right? So like okay, there's a motor, what what does your thing kind of look like, and like where do the pieces go? And they're like, well, half of the pieces, they're like, I don't know yet. I'm like, okay, well, that's good. Gaps are good, but like, let's focus on like filling those out before we're like CADing up stuff and then nothing fits in the box, or like, printing or like machining parts like that were, I don't know. It just
yeah.
seems basic to me, but
The
yeah,
requirements part is so tough, right? Because like,
yeah.
I mean, first of all, like,
Well, it's
we
like
get in this.
80% total BS, right?
Yeah,
It's
but
like,
just try. I mean, that's
yeah,
one reason I think people don't want to do it, is because they think they'll be held accountable to it. And it's like, no, this is just initially what we think we can do. And then you'll get into this thing where, sometimes product management will say, well, you tell us what you can do. Like, we don't know the tech, so you tell us the tech, and then, and then we'll figure out. And it's like, so you have to kind of like, it's this interplay, right?
yeah,
But
yeah, yeah. The fancy term is living document. It's a
yes.
living, it's a living document. But
Yes, but yes, you've created something alive, and that scares people, because now there's a living thing that people can point to, or but it's I mean, again, this is ancient wisdom, right? But it's like an ounce of medicine, versus a pound of prevention, or actually an ounce of prevention is a pound of medicine,
yeah,
right? And just
yeah. So you have the understand component, which, yeah, I totally get this. The like, computer programmers are the worst at this, of all of the like, I have ideas, people discipline, because it's so easy to get really, really far down the road without doing anything. Like, it looks like you're doing work, right? Mechanical engineers are a little farther behind, because you quickly hit an obstacle because you need money to make cool stuff exist in real life.
right.
But you spend a lot of time like on ideas where you don't really understand the thing that you're doing yet. So like, that makes sense. But yeah, I really like this. So we want to have a reasonable understanding of what we're trying to achieve, and then we move over to synthesis. So what does that all involve?
Yeah, so that's kind of the design process, or the curation. So now you have these these different building blocks. So in my world, right, it might be, again, like, we know we're going to use such and such camera, we know we're going to use such and such computer, right? We're not in those businesses, so we're buying those components, and then we're gonna package them in some way, right? So this is where, there's a million different ways to do it, right? Do we do a sheet metal enclosure? Do we do, this gets a lot into to understanding different kinds of processes, right?
Sure.
Or, are we going to do, molded or sheet metal or this and that? And this is where you start looking at, all right, well, what are our volumes? How much are we going to pay for tooling? So this is where you're as the designer are synthesizing all these different bits of information from all these different parties, right? Like, and trying to put it together. It's this puzzle. You're trying to put all these things together in this clever way, right? Like a lot of the stuff I do now, my current company is very aesthetics driven, right? So how can I make it look really good and be reasonably priced and do this? And this is kind of the, this is the fun part. This is the magic, right? This is, how do you, take all these different, McMaster car parts and how do you do it? You'll synthesize, as I said, you want to do plan for a couple iterations, right? So this is another thing I talk about. I like to do what I call prototype 0, which is just a mock-up, right? And this again will help a lot with requirements, like super quick, right? Like, give me 2 weeks, I'll come up with something that looks like something, right? It might be, this is, bubble gum and whatever. But then you get to that phase, and then you may want to go back and again relook at your requirements now that you actually have something that's, get all the parties again and be like, oh well, that's, now that we actually see it and can touch it, it's too small, or it's too this, or it's too that. But as a designer, you're taking all these, all these different things, right, and combining them, right, and you're trying to do it as efficiently and smartly as possible. So I didn't invent this either, but I think of my customers, right, like as I have the end user, of course, is like kind of my primary customer. But then, as I mentioned, I have the service department, the operations department, right? Like there's people that have to build every single thing that I design, right? So if I do it, that's impossible to build, or you have to have a tiny hand, right? I'm not treating that one customer right. And a lot of times you get into these conflicting requirements too, right? Like, so, for example, aesthetics and serviceability can be in direct conflict, right? Like aesthetics, they want no visible fasteners, right? Like this thing just, goes together with high bond tape or whatever, and you see nothing and it's seamless, right? It's kind of like the,
it's like servicing a BMW or something, it's like,
right. It's the Wally versus the
later.
Eva.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I really try to drive home the point about iteration and like not avoiding failure, but like failing on purpose. So going back to something else that you said, but like people have a real like emotional or psychological problem with making something that's not perfect, right? And even when I map it out and I say like, hey, our purpose here is to find the problems, and then we deliver a prototype. They make their prototype and they're like, this is wrong. I'm like, that's great. Now we know what's wrong, right? But like, what are some like, what are your thoughts, or if you have some insights on like overcoming kind of that, as an engineer, right? As things like, hey, everything should be kind of like colored inside the lines. How do you get over that and say like, hey, product development is a little bit more messy than that? Like, how do you get into that mind space?
Right. Yeah, I think you've hit on something really important here. And like, I think the high level answer is you got to put your ego aside a lot of the times, which is difficult to do for all of us. But I think engineers can be maybe even a little bit harder to do, because we live in very much a world of right or wrong sometimes, right? Like, this is math and science, right? So it works or it doesn't work. So we're kind of used to that, that analog, but design is a lot messier, right? It's I think of it as knobs, right? So it's requirement trade-offs. So it's not right or wrong. It's optimization of those different requirements to the degree that you can. So, if it looks a little bit more, if you want me to hide fasteners, I can hide fasteners. It's going to drive up cost a little bit, as I said. So it's not right or wrong. It's just trying to do the best we can to actually deliver, right? Add value to the customer and make money and continue to move forward. So you get a little bit of a thick skin over time, right? You have to do that, right? You know that you're going to go into a meeting. I had this happen tons of times where I think this design is genius, and there's no parade, right? Like,
Yeah.
like I've addressed all your answers, right, with this clever solution, and still somebody will say, well, can you make it cheaper? Can you make it this, or can you make it that? So you have to live in the world of self-satisfaction, knowing that you've done a good job, knowing that you're doing something that's awesome, even if other people don't see it. It's tricky. This is the balance. So like the Proto Zero, like it's like, I think of it this way, and if it just works, right? Like if the screws go together, right? If it powers on, like that's a huge success, right? For a first mock-up, right? And then the second one, you're adding, you're refining, right? You might be adding some cosmetics to it. You might be thinking about design for manufacturing, design for assembly. But it's very tough because that first one, you're just trying to get something that works, right? To say, is this feasible, right? But immediately people look at the first one and start commenting on, can it look better? Like that was not the point of this one.
Yeah, I'm like, if I'm not sanding and drilling on a 3D print, like I didn't print it fast enough, right? I didn't make it soon enough. But
again, it gets back into a little bit of sales, right? Where it's like you got to have that vision, right? And it's like, over time I realized people don't think the way I do. So it's like when, it's why people stage apartments, right? Because like people can't imagine it without furniture, and that's the way it is when you're showing a first prototype, right? Like people see things very literally. It's like, don't worry about it. We'll put some nice big fillets on it. We'll whatever, right? Like
I call it collapsing realities, because like it's a infinite Schrodinger's cat thing. It's like everything exists until they see the object, and then all discussion becomes about that object itself instead of like all of the future possibilities, like the multiverse of like options that we have moving forward. It all becomes like, this like angle is off, and it's like, yeah, and it could be changed because that's what this process looks like. So even for me, like that's tough sometimes, and like managing people's expectations is a big challenge. And like I'm over on that side of things, like on the business side of things, more on the more than anywhere else like now. But I don't know.
So a couple tips, right? I try and stay out of aesthetics when I can, right? Because there's no right or wrong answer, right? Like I think about like cars, right? Like it's personal preference.
Like so how shiny is shiny, right?
Right. It's like two people in the room will have a very different opinion. One person will love it and one person will hate it. Another great option, bring options to the table, right? Bring 3 different options, right? If you can, right? Because then, management loves that, first of all, right? Like they feel like, yeah, we decided, whatever. But like, then it's like, it's not that the one failed. It's we're presenting 3 options, and we've gone with this one, and so that's another approach to things. And again, just bringing parties in as much. Communication is huge, right? So have design reviews. You can have little mini design reviews, right? Just have someone come over, do a Zoom meeting and show them the CAD design. Pull it up, get people involved with the process so they understand the process a little bit. It's like, look, this is very fluid. Look, I can just do this on the screen. You want it more round, I'll make it more round, right?
Don't do that. Let me hold the mouse like hand over hand, like moving the mouse situation. But I do like the given the 3 options thing, because like, your brain is a difference engine, so it looks at 3 options and eliminates one, and then it becomes like a conversation where we can combine elements and come up with something that we like. But
if you want to get real devious, you give the one that you want, and then you give 2 lesser options, right? And then when they pick the one you want, you're like, oh, very, very wise of you to pick that.
That's the blue duck, right? It's like,
right.
It's like, yeah, you're like, well, I really like this, but aren't ducks like yellow, not blue? And you're like, absolutely, great insight. Let's make it yellow and ship it, right?
But it's about moving forward, right? Like you
Yeah,
have
yeah,
to move these designs forward, right? Like you
yeah.
get stalled and you have to install things, right? Like nobody wins when you're stalled on a design forever. You're not winning. You're not moving on to the next cool thing. The company's not winning. So you just, you have to keep moving the ball forward.
That's awesome.
It's a part of the
Yeah,
process. It's just, you know,
yeah, yeah. I really like that. Um, Dan, I don't want to keep you forever, but I mean, I don't know. We could get into product development conversations for a long time, but for people that are watching, if you have a specific question about product development, um, Dan, what's the best place that people can get a hold of you or find you? Solid Smack. I mean,
you can
that's
definitely, yeah, you could read those articles. I've had people reach out through LinkedIn. So it's Dan at
okay.
solidsmack.com. I'm always looking for, if you have things, I'll write about them, right? Send me a question and I might write an article. That's where this stuff usually comes from, is some frustration at work where I'm like, this is something that other people might be experiencing. So let
Yeah.
me try and get it out there.
I'm still like over the moon about the article on the drawings. So after like a month, I'm like, I just saw it when I was looking up your contact information. I just saw it again, and I was like, yes, preach, brother, yes.
There's
Like,
2 more coming. That was law 1. So there's
yeah.
law 2 and law 3. So
But
hopefully I don't disappoint.
for people that are watching, if you want more of an inside view from a designer perspective, Solid Smack is a really cool website. I've been following for a really long time. It just so happens that Dan writes for Solid Smack. But you can find information on tools and software and design tips and kind of design industry stuff. So I don't know. I just think that that's really cool. And reach out to him if you have a question. He's a good writer, and he'll help answer those questions. And same thing for me. I think there's a ton of there's a lot of parallels between like the struggles that you have in product development with the struggles that you have like on the next level up in business, in developing a business. Like, so developing the business strategy is kind of like developing the product strategy, but like people have the same issues as like uh, unwillingness to fail, to test things. How do you test things with lower risk? How do you move forward? How do you get consensus? Like all those questions. And
Yeah, so this is all design thinking,
it's all
right?
design thinking. Yeah.
Right, which is so cool about it. Like I apply it to my day-to-day life, right? Like how can I, get to work in a more efficient way, right? It's just this, this kind of cycle of trying something, see what works, didn't work, and then improving upon it, right? And
Yeah. Yeah. So
it's applicable to business.
if you're
Sure.
watching this and like Dan dropped a lot of tips that maybe when you first watched it, you thought like, hey, this is about, designing something in SolidWorks or designing a robot. But listen to it again, rewind it, listen to it again, and you'll realize like, damn, that is the exact same thing that I have with pitching my customers, or, developing what my business model should be, or talking to partners instead of talking to like my boss or my or the customers for my startup. So I think
Sure.
that's really
Yeah,
cool.
sorry, one more quick thing is,
Yeah.
I mean, I mentioned too, like, even if you're not a designer, if you could become, I guess, conversationally competent, if you're putting a product
Yes.
out and you're speaking to a designer, or you're working with designers, or even if you're presenting to a customer and can throw in some designer lingo, it's just all going to help you out, right? It's just going to make you
Yep.
sound a little bit more polished, and I think people will appreciate that on either side. So
Yeah. Especially if you have a small team. I mean, everyone wants to be heard and understood. So like, same thing if you're a designer and the marketing people are frustrating you, like you might want to learn a little bit about marketing. But for sure, conversational competence is like one of my favorite things, my favorite terms. So it's like, yeah, for sure. I have some closing remarks, but mostly I want people to go out, and I want them to check you out on Solid Smack and bug you with questions so they can move their idea forward. Right? That's the thing. But on the same side, if anybody has questions, about the business side of things, like, how do I build a team? How do I get funding? Like, how do I find like a Dan to join my team? Like, yeah, message me. That's how I come up with these topics. Like somebody specifically asked, like, what does it look like to be a mechanical engineer? What does it look like to be an engineer in a startup? And I was like, okay, let me find that person and we'll do a live. So if you have a specific question, we have somebody coming on to talk about relationships and relationships for entrepreneurs, because that's a question. If you have a random question, I love having these chats, and I love bringing on somebody that can help whoever's watching this. So message me and I'll do a talk about it, or I might bug Dan to write an article about it. But
Sure.
yeah, otherwise I'll bring on an expert and we'll have a conversation, try to answer that. But,
do you mind if I just give a quick parting thought?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so I mean, I just want to say, like, look, like, I love design. It's so much fun. Like, so if you're I think it requires a little bit of a certain mind type and personality type, but I mean, there's a lot of days where, as we kind of talked about in the beginning, I feel like I'm getting away with something. Like, I mean, 30% of the time, it's a grind, but 70% of the time, like, you're paying me for something that, like, I do in my free time. So it's a super fun, it's a super fun, challenging, exciting place to be. If you're starting a business, so many business owners try and do the design themselves. You can get away with that for a little bit, but get a good designer. I mean, you're going to get, it's going to pay for itself. It really, really is.
Yep.
I mean, you can grind away at it in your garage and learn in real time, but piggyback off of someone who's made these mistakes and been doing this for a really long time, right? Like, you're going to get there so much faster. And, a good designer can do stuff that you will do, that you're trying to do in a fraction of, I mean, learning SolidWorks, learning the manufacturing, it's so much knowledge, right? Like, just, get someone good, they'll help you out. It won't be a huge expense. And the value, of a killer product obviously can be huge.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Definitely really good advice.
Talk to
Okay.
Callie or I. We'll point you. We'll point you to awesome people.
Yeah. If I that's kind of my mantra is, like, if I can't help you, because I'm not for everybody, I really like pointing somebody to whatever resources is in the collective, is in my network, are friends, or people that I've met along the way, because I want to see people have those ideas and then feel like really confident about pursuing them. And that's why our little tagline is, change your life, change the world. Because I think that I find it really fulfilling to me. And you can chime in here, Dan, but, like, for me to, like, hold something where I'm like, that was just it's a random idea that I had, and then I drew it up, and then I made it, and, like, now I'm holding it, and now there's like 1,000 of this thing, and it's mind blowing. It's a singular experience. Like, developing an idea is a singular experience, and I want to share
It
that
is.
with
It's super
people.
cool to know that there's things that I've made that are out there in the world that every day, is getting used by somebody. All these tools that's up in a hospital wall, making someone's life a little better, or a little bit, a little bit easier, right? Like,
Yeah, it's really cool. It's really cool.
Yeah, it's a tough thing to describe, but it's and for some people that could be a business too, right? Like, it's like, that business doesn't exist. Now it exists because I had the idea and the grit, let's be honest. But
Yeah, it's not all sunshines and rainbow and whatever, but it is, in my opinion, it's a singular experience. So, like, when somebody wants that, when they want to take that on, I'm super happy to direct them to it. So yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I could talk about this, but yeah, just one final thing. Like, I love that when I see something, like, other people could have done it, but I say it has my stink on it, right? Like, nobody would have done it just like that, right? Like, that is my flavor, right? Like, the Dan way, right? And, like, that's cool, right? That's my little personal touch on things, and definitely what gets me out of bed. So
nice. Okay. Well, this has been End Hype Live. So if you're just tuning in, I'm sorry, it's over. But rewind it. And again, like if you got some value out of this, please share it out. That's how we're building a little platform for people to talk through their startup ideas, their entrepreneurial journey, and their product development. We're trying to help people transform product ideas into business realities. It's a huge scope of content, and I don't know, it's something I find really fun. So I just want to share it out. We want to help more people, so please share this if you can. My name's Callie Keen. We had Dan Slaski on. It's been End Hype. I'm out.